Obviously, in the past, the numbers that we did, we'd work from the beginning, the initial creation of the ideas. We did a version of Stairway that had a choir and an orchestra, and then after the guitar, well, it was with the...
In the thunderous realm of rock and roll stood a guitarist whose riffs could make gods weep and mortals bow down. Jimmy Page, the mastermind behind Led Zeppelin's earth-shattering sound, wasn't just a revolutionary musician who transformed blues into heavy metal magic. He was also a man who held strong opinions about his musical peers, and not all of them were flattering.
I'd begun to play harmonica as well as guitar. I was always playing acoustic guitar as well as electric, though.
Welcome to another episode of Offstage Tales, where today we're diving into the controversial world of Jimmy Page and the 6 bands that reportedly earned his musical contempt. The London wizard behind classics like Stairway to Heaven and Kashmir was known for his uncompromising artistic vision, a vision that apparently clashed with several legendary acts. There's a difference between playing music and making noise, Page once told a music journalist in the late 1970s. Some bands never learned that distinction, and for Page, quite a few big names fell into that latter category. From heated backstage confrontations to cutting remarks in interviews, Page's relationships with these bands reveal not just personal tensions, but deeper conflicts about musical authenticity and artistic integrity. Some of these feuds were public spectacles, others whispered about in recording studios and industry circles, but all of them shaped rock history. So tune your guitars and prepare for some shocking revelations as we count down the 6 bands that made the guitar god himself lose his cool. 6. The Rolling Stones. Coming in at number 6 on our countdown is a name that might shock you, the Rolling Stones. Yes, the legendary bad boys of rock and roll reportedly earned Jimmy Page's contempt, despite or perhaps because of their status as rock royalty.
There's a rumor, Jimmy, that you've been doing some stuff with the Stones.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Well, when I was in New York at the end of the tour...
The tension reportedly began in the mid-1960s, when both Page and the Stones were competing for the same session work in London's music scene. According to music historian Dave Lewis, Page once told fellow musicians, they played like they're still learning their instruments every night. The comment spread through London's tight-knit music community like wildfire. What bothered Page wasn't just their musicianship, but their approach to the blues. While Page was obsessing over perfecting his craft and studying the masters, the Stones were finding massive success with what Page reportedly called sloppy interpretations of American blues standards. There's a difference between raw energy and just being unprepared, Page told a British music magazine in 1969 without naming names, but insiders claimed the dig was aimed squarely at Mick and the boys.
Mick was there. I think it might have been some time since he'd seen them prior to that.
The rivalry intensified when both bands were climbing the charts simultaneously. At a 1970 industry party, witnesses claim Page deliberately snubbed Keith Richards, walking away mid-conversation when Richards approached him about potential collaboration. Richards seemed oblivious to Page's disdain, later praising Led Zeppelin's technical abilities in interviews. But for Page, the Stones represented everything he fought against: style over substance, attitude over ability, swagger over skill. In his perfectionist mind, they were frauds wearing the crown that belonged to true blues masters. 5. Deep Purple. At number 5, we have a rivalry that cuts straight to the heart of rock guitar supremacy. Deep Purple. The battle between Jimmy Page and Ritchie Blackmore wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal, fueled by ego, technical jealousy, and a fierce competition for the title of Britain's greatest guitarist.
Strange how we all come from the similar area. And like I said, with Jimmy Page, he was in the same.
The feud reportedly ignited during the early 1970s when both bands were dominating the hard rock scene. According to former Deep Purple roadie Pat Stapley, Page once watched Blackmore perform at a festival and muttered to his crew, "All flash, no substance. He plays like he's trying to impress his guitar teacher." What really got under Page's skin was Blackmore's classical training and technical precision. While Page prided himself on his blues-rooted mystical approach to guitar, Blackmore's neoclassical style represented everything Page viewed as pretentious and soulless. "There are musicians who feel the music, and there are musicians who calculate it," Page told Guitar World in 1977, in what many interpreted as a direct shot at Blackmore's methodical approach. The rivalry reached its peak when both guitarists were consistently ranked against each other in music magazines. At a 1974 recording session, producer Martin Birch claimed Page refused to use the same studio where Deep Purple had recently recorded, stating he didn't want to catch whatever disease makes you think speed equals soul. Blackmore fired back in interviews, calling Led Zeppelin overhyped and suggesting Page relied too heavily on studio effects. For Page, Deep Purple represented technical showmanship without emotional depth, all fireworks, no fire. 4. The Who. At number 4, we encounter a clash of philosophies that divided rock's greatest minds, The Who.
Talking about my generation, I die before I get old.
Jimmy Page's disdain for Pete Townshend and company stemmed from their legendary stage destruction.
And I don't know whether I've just got a problem block to them because they became so much bigger than the Who.
And what he saw as a fundamental misunderstanding of what rock music should represent. The tension reportedly began after Page witnessed The Who's explosive performance at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967. According to roadie Richard Cole, Page watched in horror as Townshend smashed his guitar and muttered, "That's not rebellion, that's just waste. A guitar is a sacred instrument." What infuriated Page wasn't just the destruction, but the philosophy behind it.
The drummers they didn't know the material, so we were in real trouble.
While Page viewed music as a spiritual journey requiring respect for the craft, The Who treated their instruments as expendable props in a theatrical performance. To Page, this represented everything wrong with rock's direction. Some people think making noise and breaking things equals making music, Page told Melody Maker in 1973, in what insiders recognized as a clear reference to The Who's antics. The rivalry intensified when both bands were competing for festival headlining slots. At a 1971 backstage encounter, witnesses claim Page coldly ignored Townshend's attempt at conversation, later telling his manager, "I don't associate with vandals." Townshend seemed puzzled by Page's hostility, later calling him technically brilliant but emotionally constipated in a radio interview. For Page, The Who represented chaos over composition, destruction over creation, and spectacle over substance, everything his meticulous approach to music opposed. 3. Pink Floyd. Number 3 brings us to perhaps Page's most intellectually driven rivalry, Pink Floyd.
Salted by the memory of a lost paradise.
The conflict between Jimmy Page and the psychedelic pioneers wasn't about technical ability or stage presence. It was about the very soul of rock music itself. The feud reportedly began during the late 1960s London underground scene when both bands were exploring experimental sounds. According to producer Eddie Kramer, Page once listened to Pink Floyd's Interstellar Overdrive and dismissed it as pretentious noodling for people who think confusion equals profundity. What bothered Page wasn't Pink Floyd's experimentation, but their approach to it. While Page believed in serving the song and maintaining blues-rooted authenticity, Pink Floyd embraced abstract soundscapes that Page viewed as self-indulgent and disconnected from rock's emotional core. "Music should move your soul, not your intellect," Page told Rolling Stone in 1975, in what many interpreted as a direct critique of Pink Floyd's cerebral approach. The rivalry deepened when critics began comparing both bands' use of mysticism and atmosphere. At a 1973 industry gathering, witnesses claim Page avoided Roger Waters entirely, later telling associates, "I don't need to explain my music with a philosophy degree." Waters seemed genuinely confused by Page's coldness, later praising Led Zeppelin's power in interviews. But for Page, Pink Floyd represented everything he despised about progressive rock, intellectualism over emotion, concept over feeling, and art school pretension over authentic musical expression. They were making music for the mind when Page believed it should come from the heart. 2. Jethro Tull. At number 2, we dive into one of rock's most bizarre controversies, Jimmy Page's reported disgust with Jethro Tull.
Down the corridor, honest hands and knees.
This wasn't just about musical differences, it was about the very definition of rock and roll itself, culminating in one of the most shocking moments in Grammy history.
But their tonality, their sound, was individual to each, and that intrigued.
The tension reportedly began in the early 1970s when Ian Anderson's flute-driven prog folk was being lumped into the same heavy rock category as Led Zeppelin. According to former Atlantic Records executive Jerry Greenberg, Page once watched Jethro Tull perform and told him, "A man playing a flute in tights is not rock and roll, it's Renaissance fair entertainment." What truly enraged Page was Anderson's theatrical stage presence and folk influences. While Page was crafting the blueprint for heavy metal with crushing riffs and mystical themes, Jethro Tull was winning over audiences with what Page reportedly called medieval circus acts masquerading as rock music. The rivalry reached its explosive peak at the 1989 Grammy Awards when Jethro Tull won Best Hard Rock Metal Performance over Metallica.
Crest of a knave, Jethro Tull. Nothing shocking Jane's addiction.
Though Page wasn't nominated, witnesses claim he was visibly furious at the after-party, reportedly stating, "This proves the industry doesn't understand what heavy music actually is." Music journalist Jeff Barton claimed Page later told him, "When a band with a flute player can win a metal award, the whole genre has lost its meaning." Anderson seemed oblivious to Page's contempt, later expressing admiration for Led Zeppelin's influence. But for Page, Jethro Tull represented the dilution of rock's power, turning what should be primal and heavy into something sophisticated and soft, betraying everything he believed rock music should embody. 1. Black Sabbath. And finally, at number 1, we reach the most shocking revelation of all, Black Sabbath.
Wait till the judgment day comes.
Yes, the godfathers of heavy metal reportedly earned Jimmy Page's ultimate disdain in what became rock's most bitter and surprising rivalry. The feud reportedly began in 1970 when both bands were pioneering heavy music, but their approaches couldn't have been more different. According to former Black Sabbath manager Patrick Meehan, Page once attended a Sabbath recording session and afterwards told producer Roger Bain, "They're not musicians. They're just loud. Anyone can play fast and sloppy." What infuriated Page wasn't just their raw approach, but their success with it. While Page spent countless hours perfecting his sound and studying Eastern mysticism,
And I know everyone's going to laugh, but it would get to the point where you didn't sleep for a night, and then
Black Sabbath was achieving massive recognition with what he reportedly called three-chord nightmares played by Birmingham factory workers. The rivalry reached nuclear levels when both bands were competing for the heaviest band title. At a 1971 industry event, witnesses claim Page confronted Tony Iommi directly, allegedly saying, "You're not heavy, you're just untalented and turned up loud." Music journalist Stephen Rosen reported that Page later told him, "Real heaviness comes from precision and power, not from detuning your guitar and hoping for the best." The final insult came when critics began crediting Black Sabbath with inventing heavy metal, a title Page believed belonged to Led Zeppelin. Former roadie Richard Cole claimed Page kept newspaper clippings about the debate, growing increasingly bitter each time Sabbath was mentioned as metal's originators. Iommi seemed genuinely hurt by Page's hostility, later calling him technically brilliant but missing the point of what we were trying to do. But for Page, Black Sabbath represented everything wrong with heavy music's evolution, prioritizing volume over virtuosity, darkness over depth, and simplicity over sophistication. So there you have it, even guitar gods have their enemies. Was Jimmy Page a perfectionist protecting rock's integrity, or just a jealous rival? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Smash that like button if this blows your mind, and subscribe for more shocking rock history secrets you never knew existed.